Hi, I'm Dr. Mark Pitstick. Welcome back to the sixth and final video of topic number 4, Internalize the Great News. This is for the Greater Reality Living course. At the end of video number 5, we talked about religious misinformation as being a common cause of blocks that keep people from realizing how life is really set up. And so now we're talking about solutions for that, how to discard those old erroneous teachings and become more open to more evidence-based ones, contemporary ones, and at the same time appreciate and respect the real truth, the nuggets, the golden threads that run among the world's great religions. One way to do that is to realize that sacred texts have been changed. It's just a fact. For example, Buddhist scholars freely admit that they don't know where fact ends and fiction begins about the Buddha. So use your inner discernment and search for other evidence that supports statements or claims made by that religion. Over the years, I've heard from many elders who shared that as they were a child, they would sit in church and they could just tell what was true, what wasn't, what was made up. And one woman told about she went to church, it was a fire and brimstone variety, and as they left the church, the minister was shaking hands, and so he said, "Well, what did you think about my sermon, little girl?" And she said, "I don't believe the part about hell. God wouldn't act that way." And the minister said, the preacher said, "Well, maybe you shouldn't be in this church then." And the parents looked at him and said, "You're right, maybe we shouldn't," and they never went back. So luckily she had parents who also thought for themselves, who saw what blasphemous schizoid teachings were being presented in the guise of truth. But many children didn't have parents like that, so they just kind of had to keep quiet. And some of them thought, well, the church must be right. Who am I to know? Well, you do know. You know within. Next, realize that pastors are just sharing what they learn. I actually had a clairaudient experience like that when I was around 11 or 12. And the minister was talking about some topic, and that wise voice from within or all around just said, "Mark, they're just sharing what they were taught." So you have to consider that, many of them are doing their best. They're trying, but they may be passing on erroneous information. Here's another wonderful quote to post where you'll see it often. This comes from Max Muller that says, "Nothing can be really true that offends the sensibilities of a child." I discovered this when I was in theology school and still getting rid of some of the fundamentalist teachings, and this really helped me a lot. And I had it printed on a blue piece of construction paper right in front of my desk where I saw it often. Nothing can be really true that offends the sensibilities of a child. Another suggestion for healing old religious misinformation that can cause blocks: don't get sidetracked by anger toward those who taught this information, because that's just one more block in itself. So again, just forgive them, realize they're doing the best they can, or that's where they were. Maybe they were mentally ill, maybe they're beginner souls, maybe they're imbalanced in different ways, and let it go and move toward the higher. And then a final recommendation is to deepen your connection with the light and also your spiritual support team. I say angels, guides, master teachers. So for me, master teachers are Jesus, Buddha, Kuan Yin, who is a Buddhist and Taoist Bodhisattva of mercy. I'll say more about that in a moment. And also Guru Nanak. When I read his teaching, he was the founder of Sikhism. It was just like, I should know all this. It just made so much sense. So we have pictures or statues around the house of these different people who remind us of how life is set up. Bodhisattva, by the way, is a concept in Buddhism and other religions that some highly evolved souls who certainly don't have to come to earth anymore. I mean, they know they're one with the one. They could merge with the one, but they decide out of love to come to earth to teach, help heal other people. The next category of misinformation, which is important to release and focus on more evidence-based teachings, has to do with education. First of all, it's again a fact that history lessons were skewed by the powers involved and by predominant social views. For example, I remember seeing as a student paintings of Manifest Destiny, where pioneers, white, who were on horses and in wagons going across the West, killing Indians as they went, and angels were up in the sky helping them because it was considered manifest destiny, God's will, that these white European settlers conquer America, run out the heathen savages. These white pioneers were Christians after all. And even at that time, I'm like, what? And what happened to the separation of state and church? And same way with education and church. That was clearly skewed by Christian teachings and the beliefs of people at that time. So racist. A whole race was almost annihilated. Genocide. Next, remember there's always two sides to the story. So, for example, when John Kennedy was assassinated, again, I was 10 years old. I remember watching the news, and it's like, really, this one guy, Lee Harvey Oswald, killed him. And then when I read about what supposedly this one or two bullets from one gun did, all the different angles and so on, like, who made that up? But that's what the Warren Commission said, right? Same way with Robert Kennedy and his assassination. Later, weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. So we're sold these stories throughout the years, and there's a whole another list of them. People who come up with some evidence that we are lied to are discredited as conspiratists. So just remember that. There's always two sides of the story. I have chosen not to go down those rabbit holes too much, but rather to focus as much as possible on healing, teaching, helping others. But it's certainly needed for people to find out what is really true. What is the true story behind some of these made-up stories? It's important to know that top mainstream media sources, TV stations, for example, newspapers, are owned by very rich and powerful people. They get revenues from pharmaceutical companies, big businesses, so they share stories that put these big businesses in the good light. They certainly don't share negative stories toward them. So what airs is what the owners dictate versus what is really going on out there, a factual sharing of the news and the whole story. So again, it's just important to know that. If you want to protest against it and march and so on and so on, I just say, okay, that's the way it is, and I just keep that in the back of my mind as I operate doing what I feel called to do. Some educational misinformation solutions As with all types of misinformation, think for yourself. Next, we just mentioned, assume that moneyed interests are behind some of the news, and so search for the actual written and spoken words. Don't want to get into politics in this course, but Robert Kennedy Jr., for example, has been misquoted repeatedly, and when I go back and look at the actual interview, it's not what was said. So anyway, get to the source of it as much as you can. It takes a little more time. Consider alternate news sources: Substack, News Nation, Honest Media, USA Today, and The Guardian supposedly have more fact-checking and less big money influence on what they share. And the last is to evaluate higher educational institutions for their political and corporate affiliations. For example, you may see a certain news group that says funded by this foundation. You think, well, foundation, they're good people, right? But then you find out that foundation is a front for huge money interests. So this is all part of evaluating what news are you going to listen to and what news are you going to believe. All right, the third category of misinformation is cultural. As you know, people are influenced by the beliefs of their family and their particular culture. Unfortunately, those can be blatantly wrong, misogynistic, racist, sexist, homophobic, narrow-minded. I know I grew up with a grandfather who was, he probably wouldn't say he's racist. Well, I have some black friends, but he used derogatory terms, and that's just what people used back then, but it doesn't make it right. So as you get older, look at what did I pick up, what was I exposed to in my culture that is wrong, that's not of the highest, and dismiss the lower and reach for the higher. Because many people blindly trust cultural norms, what their family and what those around them believe and how they act. But more advanced souls will do that examination. Is this really how and who I want to be? Now, part of the reason people don't do this is fear of being emotionally or literally outcast. I know many years ago when I was getting on the spiritual path, one of my teachers, Dottie Aislinn, said, just know, Mark, that when you start thinking for yourself, trusting what you believe and going in that direction, you're going to have criticism from your family. You're going to lose relationships. Your friends will shift. And that's certainly been true, but it's been a shift much for the better. So again, a great example of change. So yeah, I'm not so close to some family members, and from one viewpoint, you can say that's a bad or sad thing, but I've got much closer friends who are soulmates. Your soulmates aren't always your blood relatives. I recently had a patient who went through this. It was a young Amish girl, and she fell in love with a young man outside of the Amish community, and they decided to get married nonetheless, and she was banished from the cult and from their community, and it really upset her mom. Her mom was also a patient, and over the years then her mom kind of got back in touch with her, but some of the members of the community, they didn't want to see her, they didn't want to talk to her because she married outside their community. So that's an example of some of these cultural biases that you have to decide what you're going to do with them, because we're all exposed to them. So some cultural misinformation solutions, same as above. I mean, we talked about a lot of the solutions, including the general ones that apply here. Listen to your inner heart, your inner knowing. get to know people from other cultures and learn that whether it's the color of our skin or any of those differences, they're really minute compared to we're all children of God. We're all souls. We're all special parts of creation. So that's, again, a lot of information, I told you. But it's important to go through it so you can examine your blocks, identify them, and then address them. Use holistic solutions for them. And the Ask Your Soul technique, which I've mentioned, is an excellent way to do that. So you can get deeply relaxed, and I ask 10 questions. How can you improve your relationships, your health, your spiritual path, etc.? And then leave a couple minutes of silence where your inner answers can bubble up, and then a couple fill in the blank ones. So you can use that technique to consider, all right, I've got these 5 blocks from the past. What do I do with them? How do I address them? So the time, effort, and temporary pain, the shifts in your life are well worth it. Also, remember the holistic breathing technique, such a great way to release these lower energies. This would be around 1999. I was traveling along the East Coast, speaking at different unity churches and expos, conferences. And so I was alone in a condo doing the holistic breathing technique. And I had earlier looked at the news, check on the stock market, and it's just a story that ran. The gay man, Matthew Shepard, was beat up and killed, left to die. And I was just like, oh, another killing. That's the way my brain just dealt with it. Then I went into the breathing technique. So I'm breathing along, and all of a sudden, it just hit me. I could feel what it might have been like for him, what it's like for his loved ones, for someone to be treated that way, what it's like for the people who did it. I mean, where does their heart and mind have to be to do that to another person, no matter how much they disagree with his orientation? And I just yelled out, oh my God, it's so painful here. And it is really painful at times on earth. However, it's also such a splendid opportunity to awaken, grow, serve others, see life as an adventure, understand more of reality. And if you can do that in a place like Earth, that becomes then an eternal benefit. It becomes part of who you are, and then every part of your life improves for the better. Every person you're in contact with gets blessed from it, and you take all that with you to the next stage of life. So that's why it's so important to internalize the great news. Those are some ways you can do it. And it's so important because there's no ceiling, literally, to how much peace, joy, love, gratitude, and all the good things you can feel no matter what's happening to you or around you. So to learn more about this topic, watch this video again. This is a lot of information. Watch it with others. And then stop and write down what are some of your blocks and what are the best solutions that can address that. Read the articles that I cited. Those are listed under the resources PDF for topic number 4. Read or listen to the awareness and the transcendence chapters of my book, Radiant Wellness, and use approaches that feel right for you. For example, cathartic techniques to release stuck or negative energies. Use the audio programs discussed for this topic. I mentioned holistic breathing, Ask Your Soul, pre-birth planning, the LAUGH technique, love, acceptance, forgiveness, the ART technique, appreciation, realization, and transformation technique. So all those audios are under shop at soulproof.com. These techniques each have specific benefits. They also increase your awareness of the reality of your real self, your spiritual support team, and source energy. That is, when you get deeply relaxed, turn down your brain, it becomes an altered state of consciousness and helps you become more comfortable with your higher self and the vastness of life. And then that helps you expand your relationships with these higher energy beings. Now, remember, I mentioned my book, Radiant Wellness, these different audio programs. Remember that I want this to be available to all people around the world. So if you truly can't afford them, I mean, they're just $15 each. Some people would charge $200-$300 for an audio that allows you to have past life regressions and pre-birth planning and other experiences. But if you can't afford that, email me, mark@soulproof.com, and we'll send free digital copies. So this is the end of topic number 4, Internalize the Great News for the Greater Reality Living course. Thank you for using it fully, becoming your highest self, and sharing it with others. Let it shine.